Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery on a Saturday morning. And today's topic is one of my favorite topics to complain about, and that's the soilless soils that are being promoted by the entire industry. So for the last, 40 years, close to 40 years, we've been told to grow plants in organic soils, such as this. Try to keep the name under wraps, but nobody's doing anything different. So the problem we're having is that the soil being promoted to us, they want it to be organic. And this is what we're getting, is what appears to be a lot of ground up wood and bark. There is probably some peat moss in here, and a little bit, maybe might be 10%. Some looks like sponge rock or perlite. Now, natural dirt, really good natural dirt, is this stuff here. So sandy loam, this is from a farm in Irvine. A friend of mine who runs the farm, it's an organic farm, says that this is the best soil he's ever farmed on in Orange County. And it's pretty much white. You look at it, it's white because soil officially in all the textbooks is sand, silt, and clay. Sand and silt being quartz. You melt quartz, you get glass. Clay being quartz mixed with other minerals that turn it either gray or reddish, aluminum or some other materials in with that molecule structure. And if you melt clay, you get pottery. And that's what soil is. It's not, it's primarily quartz. It's not ground up things that just died, especially stuff that just died. You can probably grow better mushrooms in here than you can plants, because this is the habitat for all the things that like to eat dead things. Mushrooms, fungus, bacteria, pill bugs, earthworms, things that, amoebas, protozoas, things that thrive on dead things. So back in the 80s, when they first started promoting this soil, they came up with a new term for us nurserymen: you overwater your plants. And to this day, they'll tell homeowners, you overwater your plants, everything's rotting. Water really doesn't have much to do with rot. Well, it has something to do. I mean, if there was no water there, the plant would be drying up and dying from that. So generally in nature, the soil is always pretty moist. Where we get most of these plants, it's pretty wet. We live here in a drier climate, but most of the areas where plants come from, like impatiens and things like that, the ground is pretty wet all the time. It doesn't dry out. There may be dry seasons, but generally as the plants are growing, it's wet. So first of all, let's go over what plants really need from the soil, so you know why some of these things are happening. So what plants need, or what soil provides. And in science, we'd say, instead of soil, growing medium. This is a growing medium in the pots. That's what they call it. So number one, this is obvious: water storage. An actively growing plant, a plant that's not dormant, it needs water. It loses water. So there's holes, really tiny holes in all the foliage that let carbon dioxide in so they can make sugar from the carbon dioxide. But when the hole's open, they're losing moisture out of their leaves or foliage, and so the roots always have to have a supply of moisture. So the most important thing for soil is to provide some kind of water storage. Now, you can grow any plant hydroponically. There's no soil there, but they still need that water. So the water is important. So water storage, retention is what we need, number one. Two, the roots have to breathe. So in a typical plant, the green parts of the plant, the chlorophyll makes oxygen, but the entire rest of the plant, the stems, especially stems that are not green, the roots, all that consumes oxygen just like we do. And then they give off carbon dioxide. So the roots need to breathe oxygen, and they give off carbon dioxide. Now the leaves are making it, but the plant really does not have a circulatory system that'll take the oxygen that's made in the leaves down to the roots. The oxygen from the leaves goes out in the atmosphere. The atmosphere has to get to the roots through the soil so that the roots can breathe. Now, plant roots don't breathe as much as, their need for oxygen isn't quite as high as animals or us. I mean, we can hold our breath for what? 3 minutes and maybe 10 minutes, you're dead. If you don't get any oxygen in your system for 10 minutes, you might be dead. Whereas plants can hold their breath the roots can hold their breath for about roughly 2 days. So they're not as active as we are. They don't need as much oxygen, but they still need it. Low oxygen levels promote diseases that cause root rot. So gas exchange is real important. 3 is insulation. So plant roots operate between freezing and they don't like to go much above 90 degrees. That's about the range where a root is healthy. Now, it depends where they're from. I mean, if it's from the temperate climates, yeah, they can go down to close to freezing. If it's tropical, they can't go much below 55. So it depends where the plant's from. But the soil needs to insulate the roots of these plants. Whereas the trunk of, like this Japanese maple, trunk can go down probably 20 below zero. The roots can't do that. They're more tender to the cold. So the soil, and generally if you're not in permafrost areas, the soil doesn't freeze. Permafrost is found in northern Canada, Siberia, northern Alaska, those areas where the ground actually freezes. The rest, in the United States, unless you're on top of a high mountain, the ground just doesn't freeze. So the roots stay above freezing. So that's another big thing about soil. And then, in the ground, it generally does not get above 90 degrees in natural soil, let's put it that way. We can do things that make the soil get a lot hotter than that, but 90 degrees is about the max, and plants are happy in that range. So insulation, and that's pretty much it. We used to say nutrition, but that's where everybody gets it wrong. So this is better at providing nutrition than any of these other things. So our industry has gone wrong because they assume that plants get nutrition from this, from the soil. And it turns out that the majority of plants do not. So if they're telling you need a real nutritious soil, you don't. I mean, you look at the soil on this farm, that doesn't really look nutritious. Plants can't eat this stuff. They can't eat quartz. So where does the nutrition come from? So let's draw a plant here. Say a tree. Now, when we were growing up, or when I was growing up, the textbooks were all wrong. They showed the root system of plants being a mirror image of the branches of the tree. So the roots are going down here. It turns out that when the U.S. Forest Department went around pulling trees out of the ground, they found that the deepest roots are maybe 2 foot deep, and the majority of the roots are in the top foot and a half of the soil. Because the roots have to breathe. If they're down here, they can't get any air. Now they do mention that in steep mountain canyons where the rock is essentially just gravel, they'll find roots 25 foot down in the gravel because the air can get down there. And a friend of mine who's a geologist says that they were examining roots in an earthquake fault 250 foot below the surface of the ground. So if the air can get in there, the roots can follow it and be and stay healthy. But if there's no way the air can get down there, the roots just don't go there. So, you know, when trees fall over in a bad windstorm, you see pictures on the news, this much dirt comes up. That's about it. In the city, if they're rooting 1 foot deep, that's about it. There is no taproot. No one's ever found a tree with a true taproot on it. That only occurs in pots, skinny pots. So anyway, the soil in nature where the roots live is generally considered to be 99.1% mineral. And again, that's generally sand, silt, and clay. So everybody knows what sand is. Silt is just smaller ground up sand. And clay is, so sand and silt are basically fairly round particles. If you look at sand underneath the microscope, it's fairly round. It's not chunky. It's because it's gone through a riverbed and the river's kind of churned it up, so it chisels it until it's fairly round. The clay are microscopic flakes, kind of like cornflakes or something like, well, confetti, because they're flat. The clay molecule is a flat molecule, whereas sand and silt are more rounded or squared. And that's what soil is, a mixture of sand, silt, and clay. When you have these three items in soil in significant amounts, then they call it loam. We've seen so many terrible uses of that word. They say, oh, you need a rich loam, so let's make it, so add a whole bunch of compost around to make it rich and loamy. That's not, that is not the definition of loam. Loam just means there's sand, silt, and clay. Doesn't mean there's any organic matter in that at all. It's 0.9% in nature, 0.9%. And that's, the dead stuff in the ground is basically the dead roots. That's pretty much all that makes it into the dirt. Now, in nature, there's also an average of 5 inches of dead leaves on top of the ground. And it can get really deep. I mean, a friend of mine went down to Guatemala. They said, we dug through 5 feet of dead leaves underneath these avocado trees in Guatemala. And anytime you have a mature forest, you can get some really deep, but the average is 5 inches. And the University of California, Davis has stated that this is nature's nutrition storage. This is called the duff layer. And I swear that's got to be a shortened version of dead stuff. Duff has got to be dead stuff laying on top of the ground, and it's primarily leaves, but you know, there's twigs and branches and manure from animals nearby too. So that's the nutrition storage this is just where they get air gas exchange, moisture retention, and insulation. Now the way this works, the duff, so plants can't eat dead stuff, and that's the strangest thing. You grow plants in this, why are you doing that? They can't eat ground up wood. So in this layer, you've got mushrooms, bacteria, protozoa, amoebas, earthworms. That's where they feed on that. Now, when bacteria die, then the nutrition in their bodies becomes available to the plant roots. But in nature, most of it is recycled by a fungus. In fact, this mycorrhizal fungus, when plants first came on land from the ocean, I don't know, a billion years ago? It's a long time ago. Algae was in the ocean and it migrated to the land, but it couldn't eat the rocks. So in order to live on land, the algae had to partner up with this fungus that was occurring on the coastlines. This fungus can eat rocks. So that became, so when plants first came on land, they said the mycorrhizal fungus became its symbiotic partner. And they didn't know this really. They didn't know anything about mycorrhizal fungus until electron microscopes were created. And I think in the 1960s, they're looking at the roots of trees and they said, wait a minute, these aren't tree roots. What they had thought were plant roots were actually fungus roots, or the mycelia of the fungus. And they were all attached to the roots of this tree, or to plants in general. So the fungus is attached to the roots, goes up and eats the dead stuff and puts it right back into the tree roots. And they said that when they did a study on how fast this occurs, they said a leaf can drop off this tree, the fungus can return the nutrients, the minerals, iron, zinc, nitrogen, all that stuff from the leaf back to the tree in 90 days. It's really fast. So the majority of plants do this. Now, some of the highly evolved plants, grasses, mustard family, or the broccoli, cauliflower, those plants are highly evolved, and they can actually pick up nutrients from the ground through their own roots. But most of the woody plants, trees, and shrubs that we grow, they use the mycorrhizal fungus recycling system.
With water, without water, it breaks down?
Well, everything has to be moist. Yeah. Generally, plants grow in moist environments. They don't grow in dry environments, so. So there's very little organic matter in the ground. Now, there's the term rich black soil. So where'd that come from? Because soil should be this color. Now, in their volcanoes, they found this to be, common in Italy, where volcanoes erupt and send that big gas plume down the side that's, 800 degrees or whatever it is. It'll incinerate the forest around this volcano. No oxygen. It's all carbon dioxide gas coming down there. So the trees can't burn. They're just turned to carbon or to charcoal. So they found out that the rich black soils of the world occur where there are really nasty fires, or where man has created a campfire, and the wood is burning real high at hot temperatures, and it can't oxidize properly, so it just goes to charcoal. And so the rich black soils of the world, this was a report done in National Geographic year 2000, are 2 to 3% charcoal. And they said 2% charcoal is not a whole lot in the soil, but for some reason it makes the soil look black. And charcoal being nature's best, filter. All the minerals, including the nutrition that plants need, get stuck to charcoal. Charcoal is inert. It doesn't break down. Nothing eats charcoal. Nothing. It doesn't break down. It doesn't change. It'll stay charcoal for eons and make that soil rich and black. So that's the definition of rich black soil. The proper definition of rich black soil is to be rich and black from charcoal. Well, it turns out if you put all this dead stuff into the ground and you mix it up and it decomposes anaerobically, improper decomposition creates sewer gases, which are black. So if you take compost, like has been recommended, and mixing your soil to make it rich and black, you're just killing your soil off. You're creating sewer gases that are toxic to plant roots. So rich black soil made from most planter mixes are pure compost. Most potting soils are close to it. Most garden soils, pure compost. So these things turn dark as they age because they're creating sewer gases, which makes it real difficult to grow plants. Now, the one thing about plants, they need the air in their roots, but there are different tolerances among all plants. So on this side, we put plants that are more tolerant of low oxygen levels. On this side, we have the plants that really need a lot of oxygen in the ground. So water has oxygen dissolved in it. By law, the water districts have to have 5 to 7 parts per million of oxygen in tap water. Because if they know they don't have that, you turn on the water on your plants, you'll kill them. The water's got to have, it's the rainwater's probably 20, 25 parts per million. Fish in a pond need that oxygen in the water too. So the water district makes sure the water coming out of their tap has that much oxygen in it. Now, that'll support the roots of all these plants. So what's the deal with overwatering? If the water and the oxygen in your tap has enough oxygen in it, why are we overwatering plants? Why are they rotting? They shouldn't rot. They should be able to live in water. One of the most prone trees to root rot is avocado, but everybody's growing an avocado pit in a glass of water. If the water is clean and it has access to the atmosphere in a glass of water, the oxygen content of that water remains high enough for the roots. The problem that we're having is that when you grow plants in something that looks like what was in here or in here, these things are freshly killed. And because they're chopped up so small to look like more, well, they don't really look like this, but they look more like this than a tree does. That's what that way. They're finely ground up, so it looks a little more like dirt. But this stuff is freshly killed. You put this in a bucket of water, it's decomposing very rapidly. The smaller the pieces you make, the more surface area there is to decompose for that bacteria and fungi to decompose. And it's decomposing quickly. You put this in a bucket of water, and within a week or so, it smells like a sewer in there. Because there's so much decomposition, the surface of that water even can't provide enough oxygen to decompose this properly. It's making sewer gases in that bucket. And that's what we're getting. Now, when this is fresh, it's got enough airflow in it to prevent most problems. We noticed that this brand of potting soil, you can pretty much grow a plant in it and water it daily for a few months before it starts to rot so bad that it's compromising the airflow to the roots. So all this stuff is much coarser than this. So the air tends to get through, and keep your roots alive for a while. I mean, some plants with high oxygen needs, which are on this side of the table, they have a hard time from day one. So on this side, you know, we put some of the natives. Here's the native we're growing in proper soil, well, our soil. Native growing in compost, closely related. So this grower prides themselves on having the richest, most nutritious compost. The plant just can't grow in it. It's all nutrition, but it's struggling because it just can't grow roots in this stuff.
So they're the same age?
Well, same age. They're slightly different species of milkweed. This is Asclepius speciosa. We couldn't get this one, Asclepius fascicularis, but they should look quite alike. And then here's a native Matillaha poppies, which are in bloom right now. So this we grew in our own soil. This we got from a grower who grows. You know, this is one of my better growers. They use very little compost, but it's still maybe 30%, and their plant's doing that. Our plant doesn't show any yellowing, so. So some of the rules have been invented because of the soil we're using now. Don't water till it's dry. And you've probably been told that. Don't water your plant till it's dry. Well, it turns out that if the soil is moist, or let's put it that way, saturated. Saturated soil means that between, let's bring this out. Well, that's not a good... So saturation means that the spaces between the particles that make up the soil. So if you have sandy soil, let's bring this back up. So sand is relatively round particles. When you have a round particle, if you know geometry at all, a globe makes up 2/3 of the volume. And the spaces between globes is 1/3 of the volume. So this is actually, if you just look at the larger particles in here, the sand, it's 33% airflow through there. Good airflow through that. Now, with material that looks like compost, there's also good airflow in there at the moment. But, okay, where was I going with this? Okay, so when water fills all the gaps between the particles, it's saturated. That's saturated soil. When water, there's no air left in here, the water's taking up the whole thing. And the only way you can get air back in there quickly is if things totally dry. Now, when this is saturated, there's no oxygen there at all, because the compost is using it all at a really fast rate. So when this is wet, or this is wet, it's a totally oxygenless environment for the roots. They cannot breathe. All that water is filled with carbon dioxide. When you have a soil like this that's wet, the water has plenty of oxygen. Only the roots are using it. They don't use it at a very fast rate. If that water's got to sit there for without moving for more than 3 or 4 days before the roots suffocate. And even then, if there's enough gas between the soil and that water's still sitting there, it has good air circulation in that soil, and it can stay wet and not be a problem. But yeah, if it's organic, it can't be saturated. We find that if the soil looks shiny or dark, it's saturated. Especially if it looks shiny, it's saturated. If that means that the water's throughout the material, so it looks shiny. It's almost like a mirror, you're looking at the surface. So in order to be not saturated, it's got to look dry. So in the 1980s, when we started changing the soils from this, now when I was a kid in the 1950s, my dad was a nurseryman, and he grew all his plants in this. And I know it because you don't know that many things when you're a kid, but I know because I played in the dirt pile. I know this texture. I remember it, what we can do with it. So it's very sandy soil, a little bit of clay. I mean, you can make a ball out of it. You just touch it and it breaks apart. So there was just a hint of clay to make it stick. But it was this sandy loam. He grew all his plants in it. Back in those days, I remember him telling me, this nursery business is easy. You water your plants every day, and you fertilize them once a month. Very easy to grow plants. And then the 80s, everything started rotting. He called the ag department to ask them what was wrong, and they told him because they didn't have any other better answers, you can't water your plants every day. You're going to rot them. That's all they can come up with. And my dad turned to me and he says, you figure this out, because for the last 30 years, we watered our plants every day. I never had a problem. And now everything's rotting. And we knew they had been changing the soil on us. And the reason for that is to make it lighter, because real dirt is over 100 pounds per cubic foot. So this pot here, instead of being about 20 pounds, would be more or less 40. I mean, in those days, we didn't have any containers larger than that other than the wood boxes. Because if you had a 15-gallon bucket filled with that, there's just no way you can move it. And the boxes were easy to move with the hand truck. Just slip that dolly underneath there and get the box moved, even though it weighed 300, 400 pounds with the dirt in it. But we didn't have anything between, because no one wanted to pick up a 15-gallon bucket in those days, or even a 7-gallon. And the containers were actually, that's number 5. We call it 5-gallon. But in the old days, it was a slightly taller and square. And it was a true 5 gallons. Now that's like 3.5. And still, it only weighs about 20 pounds. So anyway, so it took me, I would say, 5 or 6 years to figure out what was going on. I had help from a soil scientist who told me that our nursery industry is ignorant, stupid. I know he used a lot of swear words, because he tried to explain to the industry what they were doing to their plants, and they wouldn't listen. And this scientist I met up with was creating potting soil for the space shuttle. And he says, we can't use anything you guys make. It causes root rot. So anyway, we started doing our own testing, because the space shuttle sent up spun glass. Now glass is quartz. They couldn't use anything that was in pieces like dirt, because it would just float around in a space capsule. So they had to use something that was structured, spun glass. So we started doing a lot of research, and we found out that if you grow things in pure sand, in containers, so container plants do need better drainage than plants in the ground. The ground is like a giant sponge. So if you have clayish soil in your ground, you put water pure, it gets sucked to the drier areas. Whereas in a pot, especially the pots we use nowadays, which are not porous, if this was clay, it'd be a different story, but we use non-porous material, so the water just sits in here for a long time. Because the real dirt has real good affinity for water. The water sticks to it. The bigger the pieces, the less water sticks to it. So we have to use a coarser material than real dirt, especially for smaller pots. Once we get to that size container, you can pretty much use sandy dirt in there and it'll work, because it'll be really wet at the bottom, but that's not a big deal. Most of the soil will stay the right moisture level, but in small pots, if this was filled with this, it would stay really wet and the plant roots wouldn't grow too well in it. So we have to make the soil in pots coarser. Oh, by the way, that's gardenia. Now, here's an example I just brought. So these are all problem plants we have. So kangaroo paws, oops, I didn't bring the right one. We'll skip that. We grew kangaroo paws in our own soil, and they're a little greener than those are, and I forgot to bring the right ones to demonstrate. But, you know, gardenia is one of the classics that everybody is afraid to grow because they try it once, turns yellow, and dies. The gardenias need a lot of oxygen in their roots. They're really easy to grow. I mean, once we started growing them from cuttings, we go, God, this plant, I don't lose a single cutting. We just take a cutting and stick it in our dirt, and it grows. I mean, we created our soil to grow gardenias. That was our test plant. So if we grew a gardenia in a pot not much bigger than that for 3 years. The plant was about this big. We said, okay, that works. If we can keep a gardenia really happy in our soil for 3 years, it's going to work for our customers too. So the thing about dirt, so we were at a potting soil seminar at UCLA about 20 years ago, and the researcher there was saying, well, potting soils in the United States are meant to last 5 months, which works for a lot of the United States. So if you're in New Jersey and you pot something up on your porch in April, it freezes to death by November. That's all you need is 5 months. But yeah, here in California, we expect these things to make it through years and years. I mean, if you grow a citrus tree in a pot, you want it to last as long as the plant can survive in there. Now, do know that in containers, you do have a lifespan just because plants get root bound. So every year they grow new roots, the roots die, they grow new roots, roots die, they grow new roots, roots die, and before too long, you have so many dead roots in there, the plant just starts failing on you. Now, the same thing happens in the ground, but generally you have more room in the ground, so plants live longer in the ground than you do in pots, just for that reason. So. Okay, so we do have problems nowadays. If your soil is like this at your house, and you put plants that are growing in compost in it, generally you don't have much problem because this supplies so much air to the plant's roots that even though this is growing in compost, it'll make it because this compensates. The problem is the clay soil. If you have clay soils don't transfer air very well. They don't have great gas exchange. You put this in clay soil and it's in compost, then it's more likely to rot. Now, if you leave it in this solid plastic container for a year, yeah, it's rotting in there because this plastic doesn't breathe well enough. So if it's in sandy soil, you're probably good. If it's in clay soil, it's rotting. So the bad combination is clay and compost, because there's not enough gas exchange in compost to make up for how much oxygen the compost is using. Not enough gas exchange in clay, to compensate for the compost. And, you know, the sad thing is you're telling everybody mix compost with your clay to make it better. And you're just killing your yard. I mean, clay soil originally was considered the rich soil. And this sandy soil was considered the poor soil because, you know, back in, say, in the 1800s, no one really had much irrigation. So you came across this, say here in Orange County, you couldn't grow a crop in that, it's bone dry. The clay soils like Fountain Valley, Los Alamitos, they'd stay wet all summer because clay holds the water real well. So clay was considered the rich soil, and this was the poor soil. Now, this is the soil people are successful in. In the clay, everybody's dying because the plants are committing suicide in the clay. So, and we're being blamed for overwatering. Here's an example of what compost does to plant. So we grew this now. It's got some slug holes in it, unfortunately. But this is a pepper plant in our soil. And this is a pepper plant from a company, again, that says we have the best compost. So even though peppers won't rot in compost, this color is different. You can tell which company grew the plants by the color of the foliage. All their leaves are kind of this different color of green. Now, one of the most tolerant plants, well, tomato plants, fortunately or unfortunately, are probably the most tolerant plant of growing in compost because if you've ever had a compost pile, what grows in it? Tomato plants. They can live in a compost pile. It's just crazy. No other plant can do that. They would just get, the roots would just get eaten up by all the bacteria and fungus. But tomatoes apparently have been bred to live among the dead. I mean, you know, they do these hybridizations and they select the ones that are very rot resistant so they're very rot resistant. And unfortunately, what's happened is that most potting soil companies, a lot of them, I don't know if it's all of them, but a lot of them, even the University of California has used tomato as the test plant for how good the potting soil is. We saw that test ourselves back in the late 70s, early 80s, I believe it was, where they're testing all the potting soils, and it was used to grow tomato plants. And they said, oh, this particular, there was two brands that they point out were better because they had ground up bark in them. And they grew really nice tomato plants. So that's their test plant. Even a local soil company that has made soil for us said, oh, we want to test your soil. We want to grow a tomato plant. And I'm thinking, that's really, what would you call that, a low ball? Because tomato plant grow on anything. I mean, a friend of mine at Orange County Farm Supply, yeah, they said tomato plants grow in a bag of pure manure. Just what they can do. So you can't really use that as a test plant. So plants with low oxygen needs in the soil, like conifers, lilies, tomatoes, peppers, on that side are also daisies, roses, bird of paradise, grass. Those don't need much oxygen in the soil to survive, and that's basically what you see in people's yards that look really good. And the stuff on this side, not so good. So now what we found over the years, so in the 1980s, no, it was the 1990s, what we started figuring out is that you can actually change the dirt on plants and rescue them. So most of our good customers know that if they buy plants that are in compost, now grasses are easy. If if you want to get rid of the compost in this grass, just hose off the roots, clip the leaves in half, and you're done. Put that back in the ground. It'll look funny for a few days until the grass starts growing again. But you clean up the root system like that, it really responds nicely. Some plants are real difficult to fix the roots on. 60% loss on gardenias when we tried to fix the gardenias that our other growers were growing. So we said, okay, we got to just grow these from scratch. Avocados, we've had similar failure rate. Try to fix an avocado system because all the avocados sold retail are in compost. And when I was growing up, I was trying to grow avocados, and I'd waste about 5 years on each tree trying to make it do something, and it just wouldn't grow. So now we grow avocados from little tiny plants that are not in compost. So one of the research journals I used to get was one from Holland. And Holland, they do a lot of research for container growing because Holland, their number one industry is, well, I don't know if it's number one anymore. Now it's finance. But it used to be growing things for Europe in hothouses, in containers. So they had to figure out how to grow container plants to make a profit on the resulting plant. So in their journals, they would say, okay, we use stuff like sand, pumice, which is volcanic perlite and pumice. These are all just blown up silica dioxide, which is quartz, which is sand. So all this is similar. They use vermiculite, which is essentially popped clay. And one of the latest things is using clay pellets. Now they also use plastic foam, which doesn't break down. They're now using rice hulls. So rice hulls, it turns out, are 90% silica. They don't decompose. They just don't decompose, which is interesting. They said in the levees near Sacramento, they fill the levees with rice hulls because they have rice industry there. They don't know with the hulls. So they stick them in the levees, and they said you can go to a levee that was filled 50 years ago, reach your hand inside and pull out rice hulls that look fresh. They just don't decompose. So rice hulls are just about a permanent material that doesn't decompose. We'd like to use this in our potting soil mix because it's very light, but the company that mixes our soil for us says they don't want this in their warehouse. It just blows all over the place, so they don't want to use it, unfortunately. Peat moss is also used. So peat moss is something that died, but it died a long time ago. Usually 50, 100, 200 years ago. So it doesn't decompose very fast. And then they're also using coconut coir. So coconut coir is freshly killed. We don't like to use it. Coconut coir, you can grow plants in it for about, and pure peat too, you can grow plants in both these for about a year without much trouble because they can provide enough airflow to the roots. About a year and a half, this breaks down so bad that the roots start dying, and in about a year and a half, same thing with peat. Peat is much finer to begin with, so you can't really lose much airflow in here before you lose your roots. Coconut coir breaks down faster than peat moss because it's fresher. And the other reason we don't like coconut coir is because when things are freshly killed, they still contain a lot of tannins, which are things that wood has in it to help prevent things from eating it. Tannins are chemicals that plants create in their wood structure to prevent fungus and bacteria from attacking termites, things like that from attacking them. And other plants really don't like these tannins. So when we see plants growing in coconut coir, because there's a nursery that grows plants in the coconut coir, you look at their plants, you go, even though they're green, they look orange. The tannins have changed the color of green to a slight orange tint. So we know there's something going on with coconut coir, so we don't like that one. Now, the researchers in Holland said that Holland actually invented the system of moving materials with forklifts and pallets. That's what they invented. I mean, our forklifts has a Dutch name on it because they invented forklifts. So they said in Holland here we have a lot of old wood, all these wood pallets that we need to get rid of. So let's try using them to make a growing medium out of them. And he said, we tried. But the problem with wood is that, let me put these away, is that wood's not uniform enough material to make sense out of. So they said you can take a piece of wood and grind it up, and one portion of the wood will decompose 2 or 3 times faster than another portion. It's not uniform enough. Like peat is pretty uniform. They know it's good for up to a year. The coconut coir is uniform. It's good for around a year. Risoles, they are uniform. Wood, when you grind it up, is not. Some parts of it decompose immediately. Some parts may take a couple years to decompose. They can't use it because they can't tell the farmer how long they can use it for. They can't tell them what to expect from it. And the same thing with ground up bark. They said ground up bark is not uniform enough. Some parts of it decompose very fast, some very slow. We can't make heads or tails out of bark. Yet where did I put the bag? So all plants in potting soil in the United States are made out of processed forest products. And that just means whatever the sawmill couldn't sell as lumber, which is bark and wood, is in here. So they expect us to grow plants in here, whereas the Dutch researchers said, no way, we can't grow plants in these materials because they're unpredictable. Every batch can come out different. Even portions of a batch can be different. They can't use it. We're stuck using this stuff. All the planter mixes, potting soils that I know of, I mean, there's a few potting soils out there that are more expensive, that are higher quality, that don't have ground up wood or bark. There's a few around, and most people don't buy them, or, unfortunately, garden centers, what they want to provide their customers with is the least expensive product, not the most expensive. Now, you might find some of the good products in hydroponic stores because they need to provide their customers with something that'll grow the weed properly. And this generally won't. You want a good product, you have to go to the companies that know what's good. So anyway, back in the early 90s, when we started doing our own tests with potting soils, we found that the potting soil we were selling at the time, which was Whitney Farms, which is one of the better names in potting soils in the late 80s, we discovered that it was a lot worse than growing them in sand. Sand beat every potting soil that we had, that we were selling at that time. So we said, we can't do this. We can't have a potting soil that grows the plant so badly that the plant in sand looks. I would tell you, our first test plant was strawberry. In the Whitney Farms potting soils, the strawberry plants were like this. And that's what we're used to. They're about 8 inches across. In pure sand, that same strawberry plant was that big. It's like 10 times bigger. the leaves were like 10 times bigger. The berries were like 4 or 5 times bigger. We're going, there's just no way we can continue selling this organic potting soil. But we knew that sand would be almost impossible to sell our customers just because of the weight. Plus, it was, most sand is white. Everybody's used to brown potting soil at that time, and we didn't think we can do it. So we started looking at lighter versions of sand, and the lightest version of sand that nature makes is pumice. Pure quartz, maybe 1/3 the weight of sand. But when we use pumice, we're going, okay, we got to water this thing twice a day. That's not quite going to work for us. So I asked the guys at UC Riverside what holds water the best for plants, and they did tell us it's peat moss. So clay holds water better than peat, but it won't let go of it. Whereas peat, if peat gets wet, it holds a lot of water, and the plants can suck it all off the peat till it's bone dry. Whereas clay, the plants can't pull the water off clay very well. So peat's actually a better water storage than the clay is. Plus, what the peat helps us do with the pumice is it wicks the water sideways. So if you just had a bucket full of pumice and you watered it, the water would just go straight down and out to the bottom hole. If you have peat moss mixed with it, it goes horizontally, and it stores a lot of it too. And because we have all this pumice in our soil, so our top potting soil looks like this. And roughly 65% of this soil is inert. It doesn't change. So that provides the airflow and the stable structure. The peat moss is 35% of this. And what we know about soil is that the structure of soil is, especially if it's sand, is 66% of the volume is sand, and 33% is the air space in between there. When the peat moss in here decomposes slowly, but it decomposes, the volume doesn't seem to change because 65% of our soil is solid material, which is essentially the same as real dirt. And we think the peat moss isn't contributing much to the soil volume because it's sitting between the bigger pieces of rock. So even though as this ages, we just don't see much change in the soil level, whereas you get a plant in compost, and even by the time we're getting it, the soil is shrinking down because it's disappearing on you. What people who promote compost are believing is that when you put this in the ground, it just turns into air. It's like, that's really strange. Why would you want that to happen to your soil? But compost, the ultimate final products, if it decomposes properly, is just water and carbon dioxide. And why would you want to grow a plant of that? But our industry, for some reason, listens to the wrong people. I mean, academia right now still won't retract that compost is the proper way to grow plants. They won't do it. It's just like any other industry or any other line of research. You cannot go against a senior PhD. So they're stuck with having to promote compost as better than dirt to grow plants. And so hopefully we can change the way that you see how plants should be grown Once you know the proper way to grow plants, boy, it's just like the old days where all you have to do is water and feed. And you can water as much as you want and it doesn't hurt anything. Water is not the problem in our trade like everybody wants you to believe it is. Yes. These need more oxygen in the soil. No compost. So the problem with soil is when you mix it with compost, the compost uses up the oxygen faster than the plants are using it, and they just suffocate because of the compost mixed with the soil. Yeah.
So what combination or what formula of food we use for say gardenia compared to any of the plants on the other side?
No compost in the soil. That's pretty much it. You get that compost out of the soil. Yeah, I mean, gardenias will go in clay. They used to in the old days. Clay is not toxic. It's just toxic if you mix it with compost. And anything in a pot, because the surface of the pot is non-porous, you get compost. Even if you have really sandy soil, if there's compost in it, it's in trouble, just like this plant's turning yellow. Right. If your soil at your house is sandy by itself, you may not have any problems. That's what we find. Now, a friend of mine, a late friend of mine who used to be he was a contractor for 40 years, he said he learned early on that, because he was gardening or doing his work in San Juan Capistrano area, which was a lot of clay down there. He said, I found out on early that if I just plant a plant and backfill it with pure sand, I didn't lose any plants. So that's one of his methods of making sure that the compost in here wasn't going to kill the plant. He'd surround it with very, very breathable soil to make up for that. And again, you have to learn what plants fix these and what you don't. We haven't worked with every plant, but we know gardenias are difficult, avocados are difficult to fix. But a lot of plants, like we used to sell citrus here, now we're in a citrus quarantine zone. Every tree we sold the last few years, we sold citrus before we got in the quarantine zone. We get them from the grower, they're growing in compost, knock it all off, put it in our soil. What we would do to prevent shock, because there's always shock when you work with the roots, we put it in a half day of shade for 2 weeks. It takes 2 weeks for roots to recover from damage. So we'd put them in half day of shade for 2 weeks and then we'd sell them. And we know from that point, we were certain from that point that the homeowner would not have problems with, quote, too much water. I mean, when you have plants in compost, you have to irrigate really carefully to prevent root rot. I mean, I found, so back in the 80s, when I had my first home, if they came to us and, what we found out is that if you have a drip system on them, so let's say you have now I know it's just better to fix it, but if you have a plant in compost, this is all bad compost, you got to keep that soil dry, but you still have to water it. How do you do that? What we do is we put our drip irrigation right at the edge, so it got this area wet. We wouldn't put it here. We put it near the trunk. We're getting rot because we're getting this whole thing wet. Put it right at the edge of the root ball. The plant would do really well. Keep this area dry. I mean, I was thinking to myself in the 80s, how can anyone grow plants? Everything's rotting. I mean, because you can't get this area wet. Yeah, the roots do grow out where the water is. I mean, at my house I had in the 90s, we were growing, this was right before we knew how to fix plants. We grew plants from 5 different growers, same plant from 5 different growers that we were using for plant material. One grower, all their plants died 3 years after planting. We pulled them out of the ground. They were rotten right here. 5 years in the ground, all the plants from another grower died. 8 years later, all the plants from a third grower died. My last 2 growers, their plants didn't die ever. And they're all using different soil mixes. And so we found out that way which plants to avoid, which growers to avoid. I mean, we stopped buying from a lot of the big name stores that everyone else still sells plants from because we couldn't keep their plants alive. Now, I will admit, we do sell plants from Monterey Bay, whose soil will kill a lot of plants. Oh, I shouldn't say their name. But anyway, it's not their fault. I mean, again, the universities have taught this generation of growers to grow plants in compost. And these growers graduating from the Cal Polys and the universities believe their professors to be right, and for good reason. I mean, guy's got a PhD. But they're ruining all these nurseries. So it's not the nursery's fault. And one of the excuses we also heard, so I told one of my growers that was sold, they changed owners. I told the new owner, if you use this soil instead of the soil you're using, which is ground up wood, your plants will do a lot better. And they came back to me and said, well, our soil supplier won't do it because materials like these damage their blending machines. They'd rather use ground up wood and peat moss, well, ground up wood primarily, ground up bark, because it doesn't hurt their machinery. They use these big blending machines that blend all these wood products, wood soft. Pumice is rock. Rock will damage all their metal equipment.
How does your producer?
Tractors. I mean, they have blending machines, but we know they're not using them because occasionally we'll get a piece of pumice that's like this big, and a block of sand, hard sand that's that big. We know they're not using the blending machines. They've never fit through. Occasionally we'll get a rag in it. So what they're doing is they're just putting on a platform or pavement and getting their tractors, front loaders, and mixing it all by.
Not efficient, but that's why.
Yeah. Yeah, it just eats up the metal parts of their machinery too fast if they're using pumice rock. Pumice and sand are really hard on machinery. So that's their excuse. What can you do? But yeah, so the nursery industry, the research that was done about in the 1980s. They found out that for the 3 months it takes for a nursery to grow a plant, they grow a lot faster in here than they do in here. The same research says that in about 8 months, this becomes a toxic medium. But by that time, they expect all the nurseries to have the plants sold. That's the research. This becomes a toxic medium after 8 months. So they said you either have to have your plants sold or put them into fresh bark or discard them. And that's our industry. They believe that research to be the correct research. It's like, don't they know plants? Now, it is true, in most of the United States, they haven't grown plants in containers for very long. Only California grew plants in pots until the 1980s. Everyone else grew plants in the ground, and when someone wanted a plant, they dug them out of the ground, wrapped them in burlap, put them back in the ground. Perfect plant. California, they can put them in pots because we don't freeze here. Southern California, Central Valley does not freeze. The plants don't freeze in the pot. But pretty much you go any other place other than southern Texas, the very southern tip of Texas, and the southern part of Florida, everything else freezes. Unfortunately, what they found out is if they made a hole in the ground and dropped the bucket into the hole in the ground, it wouldn't freeze. So all the nurseries in the 80s said, oh, we got to get into growing plants in containers. It's much more convenient than growing them in burlap or bagging them up. So they asked California, how do you grow plants in pots? And we told them, bark. So we're in big trouble here. Well, you're not in big trouble, but our industry is in big trouble because they've made plants really difficult to succeed with. Again, there are some plants that we don't have problems with, but it makes it so your choices get really narrow as you learn, as you start growing plants. You go, okay, this one died, we're not going to do that one again. This one's fine, we'll do this one over and over. So next week we'll be talking about some of the other rules besides soil, what you need to do with your garden to make it successful. Any questions?
So I bought a lime tree. I came here first. It's south. Went to Lake Forest and bought it. Put it in the ground 6 to 8 months ago, and then we moved it. Can I still pull it out of the ground, wash this? Wash this, or is it leave it?
So it's in the ground.
It's in the ground. It's been moved twice.
So you've got a lime tree that you did well. You cleaned up the roots, put them in the ground.
I did it because I didn't know
Okay.
if it was one of the trees that would survive.
You can. It's good to cut most of the top off when you do that.
It's not growing in the leaves.
Okay.
Pretty bare.
Yeah.
It's okay?
Oh, well, if it's bare, then yeah, go ahead. You have to save it. So yeah, if you're going to pull a plant out of the ground and fix the roots, if there's not much foliage on it, there's no issues at all. Just clean up the roots, and if it's got any life left, it'll make it back.
Yeah, right now it's got a little tiny shoot from the bottom of the trunk that's green. It looks like it's still there.
Oh, yes.
Classify the soil over at duck barring. The soil is
Clay. Yeah, the local farm or ranch that we are good friends of ours. We actually use part of the land as a growing ground. Yeah, they have avocados and citrus growing in solid clay. I mean, right now the ground's drying out, so the ground between the trees that's not being irrigated has got these big crevices forming. That's clay when you get those crevices forming after it's dry. Now, what's interesting over there, most of their trees are thriving in that clay. They've got an injection system into, I thought they were fertilizing into their injection system. I look at the label on the, quote, fertilizer tank, hydrogen peroxide. So they're putting oxygen in their water, extra oxygen, to keep those plants thriving in the clay. Something that they can do on a big scale, but nothing you'd want to do in your yard. Yes.
So, I mean, I haven't heard this for a long time, but they used to say that if you had clay, you could add gypsum to it to break it down a bit.
Okay, question is, does gypsum do anything to clay?
Yeah.
It will if the clay is loaded with sodium. So gypsum added to sodic soil. So the soils within a mile or so of the ocean have a lot of sodium in them from the salts. And they can be sticky and slimy because of the sodium. So if you put gypsum on that, the calcium in gypsum will dissolve and take the place of sodium, and the sodium gets washed out of the soil so that that it can be a little less slimy and sticky. But if you don't have sodium in it, it doesn't do a whole lot, although gypsum does help water break surface tension of the ground better. So it helps get the soil wetter easier. It's if you leave it on top, that is. Don't mix it, but you leave it on top. Right. Right. And it also is a major nutrient for plants. Calcium is, in a tree, in fact, it is more necessary than phosphorus to have calcium in trees. So the people who sell us orchard plants like Dave Wilson and Brokaw Nursery that sells orchard plants tell us, remind customers, put gypsum down all the time. You can't overdo it. I mean, Brokaw, I think on their website says 35 pounds per tree per year. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of gypsum. But eventually, yeah, anything that died is anything from your pantry at all is nutritious. I mean, if it's something that was once alive, it's got nutrition there. Now, some things break down real slow. I mean, they told us, we finally got noticed that bone meal made from cow bones takes 5 years to become available to the plants. It's like, okay. so yeah, and we'll talk about that next week too. Fertilizing, watering properly, crop rotation, all of that. Okay, thank you.